Arizona Territory, 1883, the sun had just broken over the Dragoon Mountains when Eliza Sutton spotted the lone rider galloping hard through the dust, his horse lathered and wild-eyed. She put a hand on her daughter's shoulder, gently guiding her and her little brother back inside the half-standing barn. "Stay quiet," she whispered. The rider dismounted fast, boots hitting the dirt with a heavy thud. His hat was low, shirt stained with sweat and trail dust, revolver at his hip, rifle slung across his back. He scanned the wrecked homestead with eyes that had seen too much. "Hello," he called, voice low but steady. "Anyone alive?" Eliza stepped out, rifle in hand, heart pounding. "That depends who's asking." He took a step closer, hands out. "Name's Josiah Trenton. I found your boy a mile out. He was crying for his mama." Eliza's breath caught. Her son, Matthew, barely 5, bolted outside and clung to her skirts. "Mama, it's him." "He helped me." Josiah knelt down and ruffled the boy's hair. "Told you I'd get you home." Eliza lowered the rifle and studied him. He was younger than she expected, maybe 30, with a hard-won calm in his eyes. Not a lawman, not a bandit either, just a cowboy with a good heart and a fast hand. "I appreciate what you did," Eliza said, voice still guarded, "but we don't need more trouble." "Wasn't looking to bring any," Josiah said, "just saw the smoke and followed it." She glanced back at the smoldering remains of the house. The fire had come fast after the raid. They had nothing left now, just each other, a half-ruined barn and a patch of land no one wanted. Josiah shifted his weight, eyes flicking to the broken corral. "Who did this?" "Don't know. Came in the night, took the horses, tore the place apart." She paused. "My husband's been gone a year. Died of fever. It's just me and the children now." "Then you're not safe out here alone," she bristled. "I have managed so far." Josiah didn't argue. He just looked around, eyes settling on the boy and the girl Maribel, age 7, face streaked with ash. "Can I help?" "We're not ready," Eliza said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "I mean, I can't take help from someone I barely know." Josiah stepped closer, voice quieter now. "We're ready enough to love." Eliza blinked. "What?" He looked right at her. "You and your children, you still have love inside you. I can see it. That's enough to start again." She stared at him, heart thudding. No man had looked at her like that in a long time, maybe ever. Matthew tugged at Josiah's sleeve. "Are you gonna stay, mister?" Josiah smiled. "If your mama lets me." Eliza didn't answer right away. She watched the way Josiah crouched beside her son, how gentle he was, how still. This was not a man running from something. This was a man who had already stopped running. "You know anything about fixing fences?" she finally asked. "I do," he said, "and I am good with a hammer." "Well," she said, handing him the spare hammer from the barn wall, "then I guess you better get to work." By the third day, Josiah had repaired the barn roof and patched the holes in the corral. He worked quietly, always stopping to help with the children or haul water from the creek. He never pushed, never pried. Eliza caught herself watching him too long one morning, the way his shirt clung to his back, the easy way he talked to Maribel as he helped her feed the chickens. He noticed. He looked up, caught her eyes, and smiled. She looked away fast. That night, after the children were asleep, Eliza stepped outside with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Josiah was by the fire, sharpening a blade. He looked up as she approached. "You do not ever stop working, do you?" she asked. "Helps me sleep," he said. She sat beside him, the fire warming her legs. "I meant what I said. We're not ready, not really. I do not even know where to go from here." He set the knife down and looked at her. "You do not have to know. You just gotta take the next step." She pulled the blanket tighter. "You talk like someone who has already lost everything." "I have," he said. "Years ago, my brother and I tried to run a ranch together. Comanche raid wiped it clean. He died, I lived." "I am sorry," he nodded, quiet. "I wandered after that, worked cattle, moved fence lines, never stayed long." "Why stay now?" He looked at her again, steady. "Because your boy grabbed my hand and trusted me. Because your girl held my shirt when I carried her out of the smoke. Because you, standing there with that rifle, reminded me what it looks like when someone still has fight left." Eliza's voice cracked. "I am tired of fighting." Josiah leaned closer, voice low. "Then let me fight beside you." Her breath caught. She wanted to say yes. But the words tangled in her throat. He reached out, not touching her, just brushing his fingers against the edge of her blanket. "Let me stay, just for a little while. Let us see where it goes." Eliza looked down at his hand, then up at his face. "All right," she whispered. Just for a little while. A week passed. The days were hot, the nights cooler. Josiah taught Matthew how to whittle a stick, showed Maribel how to plait rope. He never stepped too close to Eliza, never overstepped. But the way he looked at her like she was the last calm place in the world made her knees weak. One afternoon, while they were rebuilding the chicken coop, a wagon rolled over the hill. Dust kicked up. Josiah moved fast, rifle in hand, stepping in front of Eliza and the children. But it was just old Mr. Tiller from Bisbee bringing supplies. He tipped his hat and glanced between them. "Well now, I see you have help," Eliza smiled. "Yes, I do." That night, as they sat by the fire again, Josiah handed her a cup of coffee. Their fingers brushed. She did not pull away. "I meant what I said that first day," he said softly. "We're ready enough to love, maybe not perfect, maybe not whole, but ready enough." Eliza looked at him, the firelight dancing in his eyes. She reached out and touched his cheek. "Then stay, not just for a little while. Stay for good." He leaned forward, forehead resting against hers. "I was hoping you would say that." And there, under the stars, with the fire crackling low and 2 sleeping children safe inside, Eliza let herself believe it was possible to start again with a man who had already begun to love them all. 3 days after the wagon came, the wind shifted. Dry and sharp from the south, it carried grit and the faint scent of mesquite smoke. Josiah stood a long while at the edge of the property, watching the sky for signs. The land was restless again. He didn't voice it, but Eliza saw it in the way he checked the horses twice that morning and walked the fence line slower than usual. She found him near the gate, elbow deep in gear oil, coaxing life back into an old plow harness. "You expecting something?" she asked, arms folded, sleeves rolled to the elbow. He didn't look up right away. "Not sure, but something's off in the air." She stepped closer, crouched beside him. "You've listened to the land before," he wiped his hands on a rag. "Long enough to know it talks if you're quiet." She studied him, the new lines around his mouth, the way his shirt clung damp at the collar. He didn't speak like a man guessing. He spoke like one who had seen trouble come before it showed its face. She reached for the wrench by his boot and handed it to him. "You ever think of owning again?" she asked. "Land, I mean." "I did once," he said, tightening the bolt, "but I never had something worth putting roots down for." She didn't answer. The metal clicked as he worked. The silence between them wasn't empty, it carried weight, like soil before rain. That afternoon, Josiah took Matthew to the East Ridge. When they returned, the boy's shirt was streaked with charcoal. "What did you two get into?" Eliza asked, brushing ash from her son's sleeve. Matthew beamed. "He showed me where the fire burned last spring, said it'll green up soon because fire wakes seeds." Josiah nodded. "The ground remembers, just needs time." That night, Eliza sat at the table mending a tear in Maribel's hem. Josiah lingered at the stove, stirring a pot of beans with slow, steady motions. Maribel leaned against the wall, drawing shapes in the dust with her toe. "You ever think of leaving again?" Eliza asked without looking up. Josiah set the spoon down. "No," she paused her stitching. "Just like that," he leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "I left enough places behind me. I don't see any reason to keep walking when I've found something worth staying for." Maribel's head tilted. "What's that mean?" Josiah lowered his voice. "Means sometimes you find a place that feels like home, even if the roof leaks and the chickens don't lay." Eliza didn't smile, but her fingers softened on the needle. The following morning, they rode out together, just the two of them, toward the northern boundary, where the fence had buckled under last month's storm. The world was wide there, open all the way to the blue line of the mountains. Eliza rode side saddle, reins looped loose in her gloved hands. Josiah kept pace beside her, quiet but not withdrawn. "Never thought I'd ride out again for anything but necessity," she said, her voice carried by the wind. "You don't have to be needed to be wanted." She looked at him then, truly looked. He wasn't trying to charm her. He was simply telling her something true. They dismounted beneath a cottonwood. The fence had collapsed in a tangle, posts cracked, wire sagging with age and weather. Josiah crouched to examine the damage. Eliza stayed standing. "After my husband died," she said, "I thought I'd buried more than a man. I thought I'd buried the part of me that trusted someone else to hold the weight." Josiah didn't interrupt. He just pulled the hammer from his saddlebag. "I don't know how to let someone carry it with me," she said. "You don't have to know," he said without looking up. "You just have to let me try." They worked in silence after that. The rhythm of the hammer drove the words deeper than any speech could. When they finished, the fence stood straight again, casting a long shadow in the late sun. On the ride back, Eliza's horse stumbled slightly on a rut. Josiah reached out, catching her bridle before she could even react. She steadied, heart racing, breath caught. "You all right?" she nodded. "Yes, thank you." They didn't speak the rest of the way home. That evening, while Matthew and Maribel played with stones by the barn, Eliza stood at the pump, rinsing dust from her forearms. Josiah approached, holding a tin mug of water. "Your hands are blistered," he said. "They'll callous," she replied. He reached for her hand, careful, and turned it palm up. "They shouldn't have to." She didn't pull away. "Tomorrow," he said, "we could start on the west wall. Needs shoring." She nodded. "All right." He let her hand go then, but her fingers curled slightly, holding the warmth where his touch had been. Later, when the stars came out, she found him sitting on the porch step, hat on his knee. She sat beside him without a word. "I don't expect anything," he said. "I know, but I'll be here if you ever want more." She looked toward the dark horizon. "I don't know what I want yet." "You don't have to," he said. "I'll wait." She turned to him, closer now. "Why?" He looked at her fully. "Because when I found your boy out there in the dust, he reached for me like he already knew I belonged here, and every day since, you've given me reason not to leave." Eliza went quiet, then leaned her shoulder against his. "I don't know how to promise," she said. "You don't need to. Just stay beside me." And she did. The first frost came early that year, settling quiet on the dry grass and curling the edges of the squash leaves. Josiah rose before dawn, lit the stove, and carried in wood before Eliza stirred. Through the kitchen window, she watched his silhouette in the cold light, steam rising off the washbasin as he scrubbed grit from under his nails. Maribel, still wrapped in her quilt, leaned against the table and whispered, "He's not going to leave, is he?" Eliza met her daughter's eyes, surprised by the question. "No, he isn't." Maribel nodded once, as if confirming something to herself, and padded back to bed. Later that morning, Eliza and Josiah hauled burlap sacks of corn down from the loft. She handed him the last bundle, the weight settling into his arms like it belonged there. "You ever think of building something permanent?" she asked as they stepped out into the cold. He shifted the sack onto his shoulder. "I've been thinking about it more lately." She hesitated. "There's that flat stretch west of the barn. It gets good light. The soil's soft." He paused at the door. "You want a garden there?" "I was thinking maybe something with walls." "And a roof." He looked at her for a long second, then nodded once. "I could start sketching it tonight, if you like. Don't make it too big," she said, walking past him. "I'm not feeding 5 ranch hands." He laughed low, the sound caught in the cold air behind her. By the end of the week, Josiah had marked the ground with twine and stakes, each line measured with care. Eliza watched from the porch, arms crossed against the breeze. She didn't interrupt. He moved like a man who already saw the walls standing in his mind. That evening, after the children had gone to bed, Josiah unrolled a sheet of brown paper across the table. His pencil scratched carefully as Eliza poured 2 tin cups of cider and set one beside him. "I didn't know you could draw like that," she said, watching the lines take shape. "Learned from my father," he said without looking up. "He built wagons, said you had to see the frame before you could fix the wheels." She traced the edge of the paper with her fingertip. "You think this is fixing something?" "I think it's starting something that won't need fixing." She let her hand rest flat against the corner of the drawing. "I've never had anything built for me." He looked up. "You have now." The next morning, Josiah rode into town early, said he'd need nails, hinges, a good saw blade. Eliza sent Matthew with him, bundled in a scarf too long for his neck. By dusk, they hadn't returned. Eliza kept her hands busy mending, sweeping. checking the henhouse twice, but her eyes kept drifting to the ridge. When hoofbeats finally broke the stillness, she stepped out with her apron still damp from the washtub. Matthew was asleep in front of Josiah, arms around his middle. A small crate of supplies rattled behind them. "Road washed out near the arroyo," Josiah said as he dismounted, lifting the boy gently. "Took the long way back." She reached for Matthew's boots, untying them before he woke. "You could have sent word." He handed her a folded note. "I did. Gave it to that old preacher runs the mill. Guess he forgot his promises." She tucked the paper into her apron. "You hungry?" He smiled, faint but sure. "Always." As they sat on the porch eating cold biscuits and apples, she asked, "What would your brother have thought of this place?" Josiah rubbed his thumb along the edge of his cup. "He would have stayed up late fixing the chimney. And he would have teased you into letting him name the chickens." She laughed, the sound low and sudden. "And what about you?" "I'd be right where I am." She looked at him, the night folding soft around them. "You didn't ask for this." "No," he said. "But I chose it." She leaned into the silence that followed, letting the weight of his words rest between them. Then she asked, "You still want to build that room?" He turned toward her. "Only if you plan to share it." She nodded once. "I do." Josiah reached for her hand then, no hesitation. She let him take it. Their fingers fit like they'd been shaped by the same wind. That night, when she laid down beside him for the first time, there were no grand declarations. Just steady breathing, her hand on his chest, his arm around her waist. Outside, the first snow began to fall quiet, certain, and without apology. In late January, the ground hardened under frost, and the sky held a quiet that settled deep in the ribs. Josiah's frame went up slow, plank by plank, the walls of the new room rising like a promise just beyond the old barn. Eliza watched from the edge of the garden bed, her fingers buried in cold soil as she turned out the last of the winter onions. The children were with Ruth Kennerly, whose place sat 2 ridges over, tucked in a draw near running water. Eliza had offered Ruth dried apples in trade for a morning's watch, and Ruth, never one to ask questions she didn't need answered, nodded and waved the children up onto her wagon seat without fuss. "You could have waited for warmer weather," Eliza said, brushing dirt from her skirts as Josiah adjusted the beam at the corner post. "I've waited through worse," he said, squinting toward the sun. "This cold's nothing compared to Montana in March. Snow drifted up past the eaves one year, took half the cattle, and near took my shoulder with it." Eliza lowered herself onto the overturned feed bucket nearby. "You never told me you worked up north." "Didn't much matter until now," he said, hammering the peg home in one clean strike. "Everything before this feels like someone else's boots." She sat quiet for a while, listening to the rhythmic thud of the mallet. The wind tugged at her braid, and the scent of sawdust hung close around them. "Maribel's been asking if she can help with the chickens when spring comes," she said. "Says she wants her own coop." Josiah stepped back, surveying his work. "She's got the makings of a stubborn woman." Eliza smiled faintly. "She gets it honest." He turned to her, wiping his hands on his trousers. "What about you? What do you want when spring comes?" She looked past him, out to the hills where the snow still clung to the north-facing slopes. "I'd like to see the creek full again. I'd like to walk past the edge of our land and not feel afraid to look too far." Josiah nodded once. "We can ride out when it thaws. Follow the river until it bends east. Could pack bread and jerky, make a day of it. Just the 2 of us, if you'll come." She hooked her arms around her knees and rested her chin there. "I've never been more than half a day's ride from here." "Then maybe it's time," he said. By afternoon, the roof beams were set, and Josiah had started cutting the boards for the door. Eliza brought out the kettle, the water still warm, and a thick slice of rye bread wrapped in cloth. "You didn't need to," he said, accepting the bundle. "You're building something for me," she said. "It's only fair I feed the man swinging the hammer." He sat on the wagon tongue and broke the bread in half, handing her the larger piece. "Did you know," he said between bites, "that in some towns a man had to post notice if he meant to court a widow?" She raised an eyebrow. "You planning to post something?" "I'm planning to stay," he said, not looking at her. She chewed slowly, the warmth of the bread grounding her. My husband's name was Thomas, she said after a while. He used to sing to the children when the wind got high, said it kept the spirits from wandering too close. Josiah let the quiet stretch. What did he sing? Old hymns, lullabies. Sometimes just whatever came to mind. Do you sing? Not well, but sometimes when they're scared. They sat with that between them, the past folded gently into the present. I'm not trying to take his place, Josiah said, voice low, I know, but I'd like to be known here. Not just for swinging a hammer or carrying in wood. She looked at him, her face unreadable. You are, he reached into his coat and pulled out a folded scrap of paper. I found this in town last week, architect's drawing out of Tucson. Thought it might give us ideas for the porch. She took it, smoothing the worn edges. A porch, he grinned. Every house needs a place to watch the rain. Eliza folded the paper again and tucked it into her bodice. You're full of plans. Only the kind that hold. That night, after the children were tucked under quilts and the fire burned low, Eliza stepped out into the yard. Josiah was still at the build site, lantern hung from a nail, casting a soft arc of light as he swept sawdust into a pile. She called softly, "Come inside." He looked up, surprised. "You need something?" "I need you to come in," she said again, quieter this time. He set the broom aside and crossed the yard, his boots whispering over frost-hardened dirt. At the threshold, he hesitated. "I'm not asking for promises," she said, hand resting against the doorframe. "But I'm ready to stop waiting." He stepped in, the door closing behind him with a gentle click. Inside, the house was warm and the silence held no distance. They didn't speak as she reached for his hand. He held hers with both of his, and in that small room, in the soft hush of a shared breath, two people who had been broken in different ways chose to begin again, not with vows or names, but with presence, with hands clasped, and with the quiet certainty of staying. Outside, the frost melted from the porch rail, drop by drop. The first warm day of March came with a stillness that settled over the land like a held breath. Snow lingered in the shadows under the cottonwoods, but the wind had lost its bite. Josiah was in the new room early, hands dusty with lye and lime as he worked mortar between the stones of the hearth he'd spent the last 5 days laying. The walls were up, the roof tight, and the floor planked with pine he'd hauled from a sawyer east of Charleston. It wasn't grand, but it was solid, and it smelled of fresh wood and intention. Eliza stood in the doorway, arms folded, watching him press his palm flat to the stone to check for level. "You've never built a hearth before," she said. "No," he admitted, wiping his hands on a rag. "But I've slept beside enough of them to know what makes one good." She stepped in, her boots quiet on the new floor. "And what's that?" He looked up. "One that holds heat long into the night, even after the fire's gone down." She nodded once and walked past him, fingers trailing along the mantel beam. "You plan to light it tonight?" "I was waiting for you to ask." By late afternoon, the children had returned from Ruth Kennerly's with cheeks red from wind and arms full of early greens. Maribel darted to the new room as soon as she saw smoke curling from the chimney. "Is it ready?" she asked, brown eyes wide. Josiah crouched and opened the stove door, feeding in a last piece of mesquite. "Just about." Matthew leaned against his mother's leg and whispered, "Will we sleep here now?" Eliza looked to Josiah. "We'll see." That evening, they ate by lamplight at the kitchen table, potatoes roasted in the coals, cornmeal cakes fried crisp in lard, and a jar of peach preserves Ruth had sent as thanks. After the dishes were cleared and the children tucked in, Eliza pulled on her shawl and stepped out into the dark. Josiah was already there, sitting on the porch rail, pipe between his fingers but unlit. "Too still for smoke," he said as she sat beside him. She tilted her face toward the stars. "I never noticed how quiet spring sounds before the frogs come back." "I did," he said. "When I was younger, I used to think the world was holding its breath for something to begin." She glanced at him. "And now I think it's waiting for someone to notice." She drew in a slow breath. "I got a letter last week from my sister in Kansas. She says I ought to come back east, said there's a teacher's position open in town, a proper one with pay and a parsonage." Josiah didn't move. "You going to take it?" "No," she said, "but I thought about it." "For a long day and a half I thought about it." He looked over at her, his voice low. "Why didn't you?" "Because there's a man here who built a room with his own hands and didn't ask for anything in return. Because my children don't cry in their sleep anymore. Because I'm not afraid of the dark like I used to be." He turned toward her, fully exhaling slow. "I was going to ask if I could give you the deed. To the room, to the land," he said. "I've been saving what I earn from the cattle I help run for that rancher out near Tombstone. It's not much, but it'll cover the claim fee. I'd sign it to your name." She stared at him, stunned. "Why?" "Because I want you to know you'll never be left without something of your own again." Eliza's throat tightened. She reached for his hand, her palm steady. "Don't sign it to me," he blinked. "I thought sign it to us," she said. "All of us, me, you, the children, together." Josiah's grip tightened gently around hers. "You sure?" "I've never been more." They stood together, stepping down into the yard. The lantern light from the new room glowed through the window, casting a warm square onto the dirt. "Come inside," she said. This time he didn't hesitate. They crossed the threshold and closed the door behind them. Inside, the fire crackled low in the hearth, throwing light across the walls he'd raised with care. Eliza unpinned her hair and let it fall loose down her back. Josiah reached for her gently, one hand at her waist, the other rising to brush her cheek. "I never expected this," he whispered. "Neither did I." They kissed then, not rushed or uncertain, but slow, like two souls meeting where the world had stopped spinning just long enough to let them find each other. They lay together that night in the new room, the fire keeping the chill at bay. Josiah's arm curled around Eliza's waist, her back tucked against his chest. Outside, the wind shifted, and the first frogs began to sing from the creek bed. In the weeks that followed, the land softened. Eliza planted beans along the fence line. Maribel helped Josiah build the chicken hutch she'd drawn with charcoal on scrap wood. Matthew followed close behind, always asking questions, always carrying his father's old tin cup tied to his belt. Josiah filed the land papers in town and returned with a certificate bearing all 4 names. They were married under the cottonwood when the leaves turned silver in the breeze. Ruth brought bread. Mr. Tiller came with a fiddle, and under the wide open sky with the Dragoon Mountains watching like old friends, they said yes with hands joined and eyes steady. That night, as the children slept in the house and the fire burned low in the hearth Josiah built, Eliza stood in the doorway of the new room, looking out at the land that had once held only silence. Josiah came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking?" he asked. She leaned back into him. "That it feels like we've been here forever." He kissed her shoulder. "Feels like home," and it was.